Thank you for joining us, especially given that the topic is a near and dear one to our hearts, which is how to run online classes, which you are now a part of. Now, before we talk about today's topic, which is efficient and accessible online classes, I just want to give a shout out to this month's sponsor, Ingram ID. This is the sponsor for my free newsletter and these free sessions. If you got my issue of Electric Speed yesterday, you would have seen Ingram ID mentioned. So they have a very special marketing program for people who have books to market and promote. It's kind of like BookBub. They have a really big email list of consumers. So this might be right for your book, or it might not. You're going to have to take a look closer at the genres and categories where they actually have a strong list and see if it fits with your book. I'm going to put a link to this service right into the chat if you want to learn more about Ingram ID. There it is. Here's a big picture overview of how we're going to tackle this topic. I see the online classes that we run, meaning we being me and Mark, because we are a partnership here, a family business. We have 4 stages to these classes. And the first stage is the programming and the scheduling. So, deciding who we're teaching with, what we're going to offer. And we normally plan that about 12 to 18 months out. So coming up here in August, we're going to be doing the schedule for 2025. Now, today's session isn't really about the programming piece. It's about all of the rest of it. It's about opening registration for these classes and the marketing of these classes and the procedures that we follow. Then running the live class, so the day of the class, and then managing the post-production, so everything that happens afterward, including giving access to the recording to everyone who registered, whether they attended live or not. For those of you who might not be familiar with my online classes, you can certainly find out about what's currently on offer at my website. Go to janefriedman.com, click on online classes, and you will see what's currently open for registration there at the top of the page. The next online class we're running is with Jane Cleland on July 10. We just finished up a class with Andrea Guevara on branding, and that recording just went out on Friday. So the first thing I want to give you before we get into the really granular stages, just kind of a summary of the different platforms and services we use. Now, there's a lot of them because there's so many. I have prepared a list. You can download the entire list at the bit.ly QR code you see on the screen, so you don't have to write all these down. And in fact, I'm not going to go into all of the detail at this second on all of these services and platforms that we use, because it would be kind of overwhelming and mind-numbing. But you're going to hear us, both Mark and I, talk about these services and how they enter into our online classes program. And I know that there will probably be all sorts of specific questions about these softwares, some of which we may be able to answer. But I think everyone will probably be interested in the list. So if you want the full list, just get a picture of that QR code and you can have that safe and sound if you want to take a further look. Now, you'll notice most of these services that we use do come at a price. There are a few things we use that are free, but we do invest a lot of money in producing the most professional product we can. All added up, it's about $8,600 total. But of course, there are some variations in pricing depending on, are you grandfathered into the legacy pricing as we are on the Zoom webinar plan? What does your web hosting cost? That's going to vary a lot. Are you on the pro plan? Are you on the business plan? There are all these variables. But I would say, you're looking at somewhere in the 5,000 to 10,000 range if you're doing the sort of programming that we do with full-on editing of those recordings and the hosting of those recordings, which we're going to talk about. So we will touch on these different services as we go and tell you how we use them. All right, so first step, after we know the instructor we're working with, after we know the class we're going to offer with that instructor, the very first step is getting the marketing materials together. So this begins with a description of the class or a marketing description. And this is template driven. We use the same sort of description for each and every class that we ask the instructor to complete. This serves as the dedicated landing page for the class at my website at janefriedman.com. We ask the author to provide a headshot, which goes at the top of the page, as you see here in Courtney Mom's case. And out of these materials, we also create a class marketing image, both a square version and a horizontal version that I'm going to show you on the next slide. So you'll see here on the class description page, there's kind of a core description of the class, what it's supposed to accomplish, what it's going to cover. There's usually some bulleted points in there. And then we talk about who should take the class, who should not take the class. And if you scroll down, there's a description of the instructor and some other technical information about what to expect from the class. So again, it's template driven and it's the same style every single time. And the instructor takes the lead on that. And then I give them feedback if I think there needs to be more or less or additional clarity on what the class is covering. So the marketing images that we use for the classes are pretty straightforward. So Canva is what I use to generate these. I'm still using the free Canva plan because it's good enough. I don't need to use any of their cost-based templates or images. I'm fine just using my own templates that I've created. And so you'll notice that we don't necessarily use like really splashy imagery. It's really driven by the person who's teaching the class. And we might have a little icon, as you can see here, like the money bag, but it's really a text-driven sort of marketing image. And the square one is primarily for things like Instagram or like a sidebar on the website or in emails. And then the horizontal one would be more Facebook oriented. And when we have a big featured promotional image in the newsletter, it gets the big horizontal image. So if you were to peek into my Canva account, what you would see is dozens and dozens and dozens of these marketing images. I don't delete them. I just keep growing the library of the images, and you'll see that there is a branded look to them. So we do not reinvent the wheel with every class. I would like people to recognize that this, just by seeing the type, just by seeing the format, that this is a Jane Friedman class, no matter where they see it, no matter what context they see it in, which might be social media, it might be an email, it might be my website. Now, here is where we start getting into the really technical bits. But this is probably the biggest reason we can run these classes so efficiently, is because we have, I feel like, cracked the nut on how to get the registration really streamlined so that we don't have to be thinking about who's registering at any particular moment. It reduces email communication. It reduces customer service time, because that is like the number one time sink for running any sort of online class. It's the customer service. So taking care of people's questions and problems, registering or paying or handling refunds or getting people the recording, that's the biggest time sink. We are paid well for that. It is not a complaint, but any chance you get to reduce the time invested there, the better. So we have really tried to streamline this. So the key tools we use here are based on WordPress. So I run WordPress-based websites. janefriedman.com is a WordPress site. I have a very special courses domain, which it's a subdomain of Jane Friedman. It's at courses.janefriedman.com. It's WordPress based. And so everything that happens with course registration, fulfillment, receipts, all the rest of it happens through WordPress. It's a secure site, meaning we have a SSL certificate. The payments are being processed on my site. That's secure. And then we use a plugin called Gravity Forms to bring in people's registration information, to bring in their payment information, and then that information is pushed out to multiple services at the moment of registration. So Gravity Forms connects to the payment processors, it connects to Zoom, ultimately, it connects to our administrative tool Notion that we use to track customer service items, and a lot of other things. So what I'm going to do is just give you a brief tour of Gravity Forms, because it is a very powerful WordPress plugin. It is a premium plugin, though, which means you're going to pay an annual fee to use it, but it is worth every single penny that we pay. All right, so what you are seeing right now is an active registration form for a class at janefriedman.com. This is actually a class I'll be running later this month called Run a Paid Newsletter That Actually Pays. If you've ever registered for one of our classes, you know it's a pretty simple form. We ask for your name, we ask for your email address, phone if you wish, and then you enter your payment method. So you can see that all reflected here in the form. It's built through a block method, meaning we just pull over these blocks to build the form. If you've ever built forms in Google Forms or Tally or something like that, then it's a very similar kind of process where you're just dragging and dropping the elements that you want. We do pay extra to have what are known as pricing fields. So this is where we can add products, we can add quantities, we can add totals, we can add a PayPal form, we can add a Stripe form, which is for credit cards. And so that's all included in this form, as you can see here. Now, we also have a fun little thing where, because sometimes people forget if they've registered for a class, and for a while, we would get duplicate registrations for classes, because if a class is open for registration for, say, a couple months, people just, they forget what they've registered for. And so now we have set up the form so that it doesn't allow duplicate registrations, and that is based on the email address. There's a little box here that says no duplicates. And so that has really helped us cut down on the number of refunds we have to process because people mistakenly registered twice. So under settings, there are a lot of different things we have going on under the hood here. So if we go to the confirmations, this is actually confirmations that we can send to people saying, yes, you've registered, success. We just have one default confirmation for that, but you can have all sorts of customizations here. We also have notifications that get sent via email. So invoices, essentially. So we have invoices that get sent from the website to people that show them, thanks for registering, here's your receipt. So this means we don't actually have to send people receipts. It automatically goes to them no matter what. There is a link to our email marketing service, ConvertKit. So as soon as someone registers for a class, our email marketing service is notified that they're in that class, that they've taken a class with us before. So it's a very kind of light CRM, so like a customer relationship management vehicle. So it just gives us information about who's done what with us. We also have a connection to Notion. So Notion is my note-taking tool of choice that's quite powerful. It actually can store databases. So whenever someone registers for a class, I have that information sent to Notion so that we can quickly look up student names or email addresses to see what they've registered for, what they haven't registered for, because we get a lot of requests about, have I taken X? Have I taken Y? And we need to double check that information for people. Then we've got the PayPal setup. So if you go into the PayPal portion of the form, there are all sorts of settings associated with that to communicate with PayPal the correct information about their registration. So we allow people to choose whether or not they want to use credit card or whether or not they want to use PayPal, and then it's processed accordingly. And you can see it's very similar with Stripe, kind of the same sort of information that we're sending over to Stripe to process the payment. Finally, last but not least, we have a connection to Zoom through a service called Zapier. So this might get a little bit too much into the weeds, but essentially, as soon as this form gets processed successfully, our Zapier is notified, which is a middleman service. So Zapier is notified that a form has been submitted, and then Zapier passes that information on to Zoom as a registered person in the class. So that triggers Zoom's link for you to join. So not only are you getting emails from us, from the WordPress website confirming the registration, but you're also getting that Zoom specific registration link to join the class. So I hope that's clear. I'm going to show you Zapier. It's essentially, it automates things like, if this happens, then this will happen. And you can connect all sorts of different services online so that they speak to each other. So this is an easy way to make WordPress and Zoom speak to each other for the purposes of meeting registration, webinar registration, and so on. All right, so that's the whirlwind tour of WordPress and Gravity Forums. I hope what you took away from that brief tour is how powerful it is. So I've really only shown you the tip of the iceberg, and it can be customized in countless ways to fit your business. So, you know, I showed you how Gravity Forums connects with Notion and ConvertKit and Zapier and Stripe and PayPal. If you use different services, if you use MailChimp, or if you use different payment processors, Gravity Forms probably works with those tools too. That's why Gravity Forms is really just a killer plugin for anything you want to do on a WordPress site that it could be a payment-based form, or it could just be any other type of form. Super powerful. Okay, so moving on, I mentioned that we use Zapier to get WordPress and Zoom to speak to each other. So then in Zapier, what I have to do, and this is very simple. I mean, it takes me about 5 minutes to set it up. I have to tell Zapier, okay, when you see that there's a Gravity form that's submitted successfully, you need to add this person to this class. So the class already has to exist in Zoom. The form already has to exist on my website, and then you make the two things speak to each other. So it's Zapier already has a really kind of intuitive drag and drop builder for these sorts of, it's almost like a little logic problem. So it's like, you know, step 1, step 2. And then it has little tests along the way to make sure that you've set it up properly. They do help you set it up properly, is what I want to say. It may look maybe a little bit complicated or a little bit techy from the start, but it is very streamlined. And once you've got one zap, they call them zaps. Once you've got one zap set up, you can keep duplicating it again and again so that you don't have to rebuild it from scratch. But you can see here, there's only 2 steps to this zap. So it's probably the simplest zap you can imagine. It's not complicated in the least. Okay, so now I am going to hand things over to Mark so he can talk about what happens once the class is open for registration. And we're starting, you know, to get people in the door. We then have to do some work with the instructor to make sure they're prepared for the day of class.
Yes, under the measure twice, cut once philosophy, it's always a good idea to meet with your online instructors first, before the day of the actual event, just to run through the tech setup. We also provide them with guidance on how to design their slides, because that's not just a natural thing that everyone has an understanding of. There's, you don't necessarily want to fill a slide with all the type in the world. It's best to keep things kind of simple and easy to read. And Jane has been doing this for so long that she's got a set of guidelines that she provides to our instructors. So we give them that, I think, probably well in advance of when we even open the class for registration. So what happens is I get in touch with our instructors when we do have the class open for registration, letting them know the sort of AV requirements. Like, we really do want people to use a very good USB microphone if they have it, because it makes such a difference, especially since Jane is on a very good microphone. If the instructors have some other sort of setup that leaves them sounding kind of muffled or muted, or is picking up a lot of ambient room sound instead of being very close to the mic and present, attendees really notice that sort of stuff, and we just want to give people the best possible experience that we can. And also, having good microphones makes a huge difference in terms of the accuracy of the automated transcripts later down the road. So using good microphones just sets you up for such a better experience all the way across the board. So I reach out to our instructors with some basic audio video guidelines. I asked them to please, when they're designing their slides, leave a little space up in the corner that they don't fill with something essential, so that in the final recording that gets distributed, which maybe some of you have seen, I superimpose the sort of the talking head of the instructor over the slides. So that's why it's nice just to have a little space left in the slide that won't be interrupted by that talking head sitting there. And then I schedule with the instructors a Zoom meeting, usually 1 to 2 weeks before the class, ask them to sit down in front of their computers, this computer that they plan to use for the presentation, the microphone they plan to use, the lighting that they plan to use, just to make sure that if there is anything that needs to be tweaked, we have time to tweak it. We always do test the screen sharing as well, because some of our instructors embed audio and video in their slide presentations, and there are very specific settings. When you share your screen in Zoom, you have to tick certain boxes to ensure that those things play and are heard properly. So we always have to check that. We always want to check if people are going to be exiting their slide presentation at any time for showing us something on the web, showing us something in another app. Those are things that we always like to test, just to make sure that those transitions are going to occur smoothly on the actual day. Somebody did ask in the questions, no Yeti mic? Well, I'm actually using a Yeti, and yes, that is one of the ones that we recommend to people, because it's very good quality and pretty inexpensive.
All right. I noticed that Heather asks how long it took me to set up all the under the hood stuff in Gravity Forums. And I would say, once you know exactly what you're doing, you know, what the form, you have like your basic form set up, you do benefit from just duplicating it again and again and again. So it's rare that we would do it entirely from scratch. I would say the process of getting a class open for registration with all of those connections that I talked about, once we have the marketing materials, you know, everything we need to go live, it probably takes about an hour roughly, but I've been doing this for 5 years now. So I've got it down to a science, and I'm doing a lot of duplication of earlier work. If you were doing this all from scratch, you've never before experienced Gravity Forums, you're very new to these systems, you know, I would give yourself maybe a week to like kind of work through all of the issues, especially if you're not accustomed to hooking up payment processors to forms. So there are definitely some different skill sets that are involved, or different technical requirements that you may need to give yourself time to get accustomed to and to understand and to troubleshoot. But at this point, it's very quick because we have done it for so long. And the other thing I've noticed some questions about, you know, does Wix work with Gravity Forums, or what's the equivalent of Gravity Forums for my, you know, website provider? And I have no idea, unfortunately. Gravity Forms is WordPress specific. And one of the reasons I often recommend people use WordPress-based websites is because it is so powerful in working with these sorts of plugins. Like, in my opinion, the best plugins in the world work with WordPress-based sites. And once you get into things like Squarespace, Wix, Weebly, and some of these other things I've never even heard of, you just don't find that kind of powerful functionality. So if you are planning to do something like this for years, let's say, I would really be looking strong. I would strongly encourage you to look at a platform like WordPress, because so many tools work well with it, and it will cut down on the time you need to administrate and troubleshoot. It'll also cut down on development time, because so many things are just ready out of the box and you don't have to hire a developer. So which brings me to the point, if it's not obvious from our discussion, I did this all myself. Like, I didn't hire any outside help, and I don't have a computer science background. I don't have a computer science degree. I mean, I'm obviously tech savvy, but I don't think that what I'm doing is like out of reach of the average person if you're patient and you already have some facility with online technology. Okay, so the day of class. So it's always a very kind of busy day. Some days are more stressful than others. There are always a lot of variables. But I would say this is the most important customer service day for obvious reasons. It's when people realize they don't have their link to join the class for some reason. Maybe they can't get in, or who knows what. So Mark is always on top of customer service email, starting from first thing in the morning when he gets up. The instructors join the class about 10 to 15 minutes early in practice mode. So while all of you are in a waiting room somewhere, we're chatting with the instructor and just making sure that everything is working properly, their audio is working, their slides are working, and so on. Then we endeavor to open it up about 5 to 10 minutes before official start time, because we want students, attendees, we want everyone to feel like, okay, I'm here, I'm settled, it's working. I think it just reduces the anxiety. It reduces our anxiety, that's for sure. And because everyone's filtering in, everything usually appears to be working properly, and we can just start live at the top of the hour. And it also gives the instructor or us a chance to get people active in the chat and warm up the room for everyone. Zoom, as you probably know, does have AI tools to generate closed captions, to generate a transcript. And so those are just really helpful teaching tools, or helpful accessibility features, that if you have people who are hard of hearing, or if they have any issues whatsoever, hearing, seeing, these tools can help. Obviously, if they can't see, they need to be able to hear, and vice versa. We turn off the raise hand function. I don't know if anyone has ever noticed this, but you can't raise your hand in these classes. And one of the reasons is because it pops up a bubble. Every time someone raises their hand, it pops up a bubble, and it really takes you out of the presentation when you see that. And we're not running small classes here. It's not like a room of 5 or 6 people. So it's not like we can stop the class and address someone's raised hand, and we don't know why they're raising their hand. And I have also found that people who are unfamiliar with Zoom are just testing the feature. They just like to raise their hand to see what will happen. And so they don't actually have a question. So that's one of the reasons we turn it off. During the class, Mark continues doing customer service, which means looking at the email, seeing if anyone's contacting us in distress, and then helps people during the session, students who are with us live, if they need any audio, video help, etc. And then I'm obviously always on the class, every single class. We would not run the class without me present. I think it's really important to have a class host who's not the instructor, who's not dealing with IT, just to make sure everyone's having a good time. And I think the instructors are also comforted to know that someone is there watching the chat, watching the Q&A, making sure things don't run off the rails. We have never had any serious problems with people getting into arguments in the chat or having bad behavior. We've been very fortunate. But certainly you want someone monitoring all of those things to ensure that everyone has a good time. All right. So immediately after class, like as soon as we hit end session, a survey pops up for folks, or if you leave class early, the survey will pop up for you. And if someone says the class didn't meet their expectations, we immediately refund, no questions asked, because that's the promise we make on the registration page. If you're not satisfied, you get a refund. It's very few people who do that, who say the class didn't meet my expectations. So it's not like we're taking some huge painful hit if we've done our job right. There's normally unanswered questions during these classes that the instructor then will answer in writing, and I often will help out with some of that as well if it's in my area of expertise. So I'm also gathering all those up and emailing them to the instructor within the hour, because they have a deadline to turn those around. It's about 48 hours. Then the marketing page for the class and the registration form, the Mark changes the language immediately after to say purchase the recording, as we're preparing that. So, but it's only available for a limited number of days until we pay the instructor for the class. And that's like if the class is on a Wednesday, the instructor is typically paid on a Monday. And that's when registration closes. We'll talk more about that, why in a moment, why we don't sell the recording. And then we have various marketing spots on the website and in email newsletters, and Mark updates those immediately to focus on the next class that we have coming up. All right, so back to Mark. He's going to talk about his post-production work, which begins again immediately after class, as soon as the audio and video gets spit out from Zoom.
Yes, that is, I'm always eagerly awaiting those video recordings from Zoom because it usually takes them a couple of hours to just for the website to kind of churn and process them and make them available for me to download. And I download, we've got it set up so that Zoom records what's on the screen share, so just the slides, and what's on the sort of talking head, what's on the cameras and the microphone. Those get captured as two separate files. And so I use Adobe Premiere Pro to bring those files together and do all of my edits. Like Jane always, those of you who have attended our webinars know that Jane always does some housekeeping where she explains the Zoom interface. She tells you when the recordings are going to show up. Well, if you're one of the people who wasn't there for the live thing and you were actually watching the recordings, you don't need to be told when the recording is showing up or how to use the Q&A function. So I do a lot of editing in the video just to make everything flow as smoothly as possible with no unnecessary interruptions. So as you can see here, I've got the on one screen, sorry, one tier of, pardon me, I've got to get things out of my window. One tier over here, I've got the video, I've got the audio on a separate channel. I've got my sort of my splash screen, my welcome screen, and I can grab the slider and drag it along, and you'll see everywhere that there's a vertical line here. That's a cut that I've made, so that's where I've edited something out. As we kind of scrub along, we see that there was a moment here where our presenter, Lisa Cooper Ellison, asked people to kind of take a moment and think about what they wanted to get out of the class. And, that often can go on for 30 seconds or a minute or something, during which time there's just silence. So that's the kind of thing that I edit out and put in a little pause slide. And then we pick up again. So there's just a lot of that sort of stuff that goes on through the entire process of the video. You'll see that the video is quite long. And here's a section over here where there were actually quite a lot of edits. And it also gives me the opportunity to, if there was anything wrong in the slide presentation, like if there was a typo, I think in this case, someone actually requested during the class that they wish that the name of the book and the author was visible in the examples that were being used in the presentation because they weren't on the original slides. And so we actually went back and added those to the slides, and I dropped them into the finished video. You don't need to know all this, do you? I do a lot of editing. And one of the reasons that I'm actually really excited to be using the Adobe suite right now, which I've not always been excited about it. It used to be that you could just buy Adobe products and you had them for life, and then they changed you to this subscription plan where now it's very expensive and you have to pay annually, and they're constantly updating and improving the software. Well, that is finally worth it now because they've now got AI transcription built into Premiere. So I can go ahead and do my edits here. And it used to be that I would have to, once I was done with all my edits, I would have to export just the audio file and upload it to a service called Otter and have them use their AI to do the transcription. And then I would have to use their interface to edit, which was a nightmare. It was a very difficult interface to use, and things got broken a lot. I have gone through many, many iterations of trying to improve this process, and actually the process is really good right now that the latest iteration of Premiere has implemented AI auto-generated transcriptions. So I can edit the transcript right here in the video interface for accuracy. And it really does a very good job the first time through. That was something that I've struggled with previous services, is they just did a pretty terrible job. And I had to just, in order to make it readable, in order to make the captions and the transcript something that you can actually make sense of, I had to spend a lot of time editing them. As time has gone on, the tools keep improving, and the tool that Premiere is using has improved leaps and bounds above the tool that Otter is using. So I'm getting much better results directly within Premiere, which means less painstaking further transcript edits that I have to make on my own. And then I can also generate the closed captions directly out of Premiere after I've done editing the transcript. It's captured all of the timestamps. And if I zoom in on my editing pane here, you'll see that is their auto-generated transcript on the very top there. After I'm done using Premiere to do the basic editing, I export the video and then use a free program called Handbrake to squash it down, because the basic video, even when I've edited it, is enormous. It's many gigabytes large, and that's just a big pain for people downloading the files. And I think it's probably a pain for streaming as well. The larger the file is, the more choppiness you might experience, the more data your server is trying to process as it's feeding you the live video. So the smaller you can make it, the better. So I use Handbrake to squash that video down to a more manageable size. So it's only a couple of 100 MB in the end. I upload that video to Vimeo, which is the service that we use to host the streaming video that you watch afterwards. So if you've taken one of our classes and you've received the email from Zoom saying, here's where you can access this for 30 days, you click that link, that takes you to our website, and the embedded player that you find on our website that allows you to play the video right there, that video is hosted on Vimeo. And it's not findable by anybody who happens to just be using Vimeo randomly. We hide it from the general public. We're just using it as a server and a host that feeds it to our website. And then I'm also able to upload our own closed captions to Vimeo. They actually have their own built-in automatic AI-generated transcription now in closed captions, which are also very good right now. So if you want to just use Vimeo to generate your captions, you can do that. And you can actually download the result, make any edits that you'd like to, and re-upload it, just in case there was some egregious error that you needed to fix. And in Vimeo is where we also create the chapters. So if you've, again, taken one of our classes and you've watched that embedded video on our webpage, there is chaptering there where you can jump to a certain section of the video. And that's a functionality that's built into Vimeo, where I actually get in and find the correct timestamp and say, okay, yes, I want you to place a chapter there, and then give it a name. As the slide says, yeah, we use Premiere to export the edited transcript so that you get it as a Word document, and that it's also available as closed captions on Vimeo and in the video that you download to keep. All right, Jane, next slide, please. Ding. Offering access to the recording. So yes, we make our videos available to people for, generally speaking, 30 days, unless we've got a multi-part class, something that's, 3 different webinars that runs for 3 weeks or something like that. For those, which we offer at a higher price, we also extend the time that those are available to people. And how do we do that? We do that at our website, because we create on our website just a single standalone page that acts as the access point for anybody who registers for our webinar. And it's actually at a sort of a subdomain of our main site. You know, Jane's website is janefriedman.com. The website where the recordings live is courses.janefriedman.com. So it is actually a separate website. We don't give people passwords. They don't have their own passwords to that site. We provide a link and a unique password for each class. So all 500 people who registered for the class are using the same link and password and accessing the same web page. And at the end of the 30 days, that password is disabled. And then we use another plugin on WordPress called Download Monitor, which manages the download functionality of all of those files. So if you've taken one of our classes, you will see that the buttons that exist on the side of the embedded video that say video, audio, transcript, and then below, download the slides, download the Q&A, download the chat, and any other files that may be available. All of those buttons link on the back end to Download Monitor, which allows us to feed to this page files that may be hosted elsewhere. So those big video and audio files, they actually live on Google Drive in our Google Drive account. And Download Monitor, every time you click that button, Download Monitor makes the link. And it says, oh, you want that file that's sitting over there in Google Drive. And then it pulls that down from Google so that you can download it to your computer. Zoom automatically will send an email to everybody who registered in single day increments after the webinar started. So if the webinar, we start broadcasting at about 10 minutes till 1 in the afternoon, then 10 minutes till 1 in the afternoon on the next day is when we could set Zoom to send the follow-up email. Or for us, it takes us a full 2 days to do all of this editing, to prepare the transcripts, the Q&A. So we set it for 2 days later that Zoom will automatically send that email to everybody who registered via Gravity Forms on our website. And let's see, the sale of the recordings remains automated for a few days. So Zapier stops sending registrant information to Zoom after the webinar has ended. So, when the webinar starts at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday and ends by 2:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, since that webinar is now dead in Zapier's eyes, it can no longer feed registrants to that. So anybody who then at 2:45 comes to our Gravity form and wants to register to receive the recordings, they don't get an automated process. They don't get processed into Zoom at that point. They become a manual touch is the term. Sort of every time that you have to put your hands on a process, we call that a touch. And so I have to keep track of anybody who registers from that point on and manually send them the emails. But we can kind of automate it again when the recordings are ready. So 2 days later, you remember the confirmations and notifications that exist in Gravity Forms? We can just populate into that notification email the stuff that Zoom would have sent already to everybody else, the access information with the link and the password. And then we leave those recordings available for a couple of days, usually through the weekend, just to help anybody who maybe was a little bit late catching it, or maybe word of mouth spread a little bit on social media, just to help anybody who came late to the webinar. But unfortunately, we don't leave those open forever. Well, Jane will talk about that on the next slide. I won't go into that. And then there is always ongoing customer service. That is the nature of customer service, is that, sometimes people don't receive Zoom's emails, or they don't land in their inbox. They land in some weird folder that you're not even watching. Maybe your spam or junk folder, maybe your promotions tab if you're on Gmail. And so, you know, a day, a month, many weeks later, 2 months later, 6 months later, people email us and say, I never got the recording for webinar XYZ. Yes, years later, Jane says in the chat, this is true. So that is the thing about offering these classes is I guess you have to decide where you draw a line, if you're going to draw one, about how generous to be about giving access to people who missed the original 30-day window. And we are pretty generous. If somebody comes to us saying, I never got that, or I lost it, or whatever. And there are people who indeed lose the recordings, or their computer crashes a year later and they say, I lost all of my saved recordings. I took these 7 classes between 2022 and 2024. Okay, here you are. Here are the links. Here is a password that will give you, 48 hours access so you can get all the files and download them again. So that's the ongoing nature of the customer service. It never quite ends.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to let people know why we don't sell the recordings, aside from that narrow window afterward, like that 5-day window. Part of it is an administrative issue. If we offered access to the recordings indefinitely, we would have dozens and dozens of payments to keep track of, which we would then have to forward on to the instructors at some time. So it would almost be like trying to manage a royalty system, basically, because we could potentially sell a recording at any time. For those who don't know, when we partner with instructors, it's a 50-50 split. So they get 50% of all registrations. And we would, I'm not comfortable selling someone's recording and keeping keeping everything. And I'm sure they would not want that either. There's also a more strategic reason for it, a marketing reason for it, which is scarcity. These classes are only available for a limited time. I would say on average, 30 to 50% of classes we do not repeat. It's much easier to market something that is going off sale, that won't be available. So, it's definitely both sides of that, both the administrative and the time sink that would be involved in making that happen. And then the benefit of we have for marketing new things all the time. That's just the way I like to run the business. Now, there are certainly other models out there where people are very successful selling recordings indefinitely. But since we work with so many different instructors and we do a revenue split, this makes the most sense for us. So I know this is the one area where even though we are very generous in getting people recordings if they registered during the right time frame, if we have people come to us even a week later saying, oh, I missed it, can I still get in? Or if it's a month later or 3 months later, it's a really hard no. We just don't do it because once we pay the instructor, it's done, and we're not going back. All right, so we're going to move to the Q&A box now. Before I do that, I do just want to mention next month's free session is going to be focused on why nonfiction book proposals often fail. So this is a very special free session where you get to submit a book proposal for possible critique. It's not guaranteed. It will not be a full critique. Otherwise, I would not have I would do nothing but critique book proposals for a month. But it is a really special opportunity to get my eyes on your material. And then I will use people's materials as the basis for that class and to talk about where things go wrong. So you can find out more and register at my website under the free business classes for writers. That's under the online classes tab. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share.
Jane, I just wanted to add one more little detail to another reason why we don't keep selling the classes in perpetuity. I mean, people come to us later, days, after that the instructor has been paid, it's still within that 30-day window. Hypothetically, we could sell the recording to them. But to come back to the efficient part of the title of this presentation, um, it's no longer efficient at that point. It becomes a completely manual process because once the registration form is not automatically sending information to Zoom and using the Zap and automatically providing everybody with everything they need, it is no longer efficient. As soon as uh, the registration is taken down, if we wanted to sell you the recording, we would have to get on something like Stripe and create an invoice and send it to you, and then check to see if you paid the invoice, and then go email you with the access to the recordings. And at that point, it's all manual touches. And we could literally spend all of our time doing that and have no time left for anything else. So maximizing the efficiency of the process is really where that's how we make money because we do price these so low compared to what a lot of other places are charging for webinars. And in fact, there is a question in the chat about how do you decide how to price your class? And Jane, I'll let you answer that one.
Yes, so all of our classes, the standard webinars that are 60 to 90 minutes, they're always $25, with very, very rare exceptions. Sometimes we'll do boot camps on a weekend, like we have Allison K. Williams doing a boot camp on the weekend of July 20th. We're doing a masterclass with Tiffany Yates Martin on POV. That's 65 for the entire series, but still 25 per class if you don't take the 3-part series. So that's part of my mission for these classes is to make them as accessible as possible. And because we do have this efficient system, it's profitable for everyone as long as we keep these, these kind of rules and procedures in place. Once we start selling recordings and doing all those other things, then it's not, the $25 isn't enough to pay for our time. But certainly if we were charging more, maybe it would be, but I don't want to charge more. I want people to be able to take the classes they want without having to have a really hard think about whether or not it's going to be worth it. But obviously there are times when we run the more expensive sessions because they're longer, more intensive, or on a very special business topic, like how to become an editor or how to run a retreat or something like that. Okay, so dipping into the Q&A box, Heather wonders, do you suggest using 2 devices at the same time? I've been told that some people do this when online teaching. Heather, you might need to give me more clarity on that unless Mark automatically knows what that means. Like I just use my desktop. I do not pull out a tablet or a mobile device of any kind. I'm not quite sure how I would be able to manage that. So all of our classes, we tell instructors, you must do this on a desktop in an office. Like, please do not present from your car. I've actually had someone try to do that. Do not present from Starbucks, et cetera, because it's going to end up being a poor experience. So yes.
I wonder if Heather might be talking about a dual monitor setup. We have had some presenters who have a dual monitor setup, so they're sort of the slideshow that they're sharing is on one of their monitors and their presenter notes are on another monitor, so they can kind of keep reading those while they can see what they're sharing. It can make things more complicated when you do your screen share, especially if the presenter has to exit the screen share and go to like Word so that they can show a live editing sample and then go back to the screen share. It can, we've had problems where the wrong screen ends up getting shared the second time or something like that. So it can make things more complicated. But yes, there are presenters who do use the dual monitor setup.
The dual monitor setup just requires a lot of extra testing because there are weird things happen with dual monitor setups. So we have to be careful. Audrey makes a really interesting point in the chat that there could be a tax problem with selling videos or recordings. And Audrey, you're absolutely right. Now, this is going to depend on what state you live in, but there are implications for selling recordings versus live classes in some states. So I'm not a tax professional. I cannot give anyone advice, but make sure, obviously, that you look at, if you're doing anything like what we're doing, look at what your state says about taxes related to these products or services. Okay. Kyra says, can you please share what your WordPress theme is? Are you using WooCommerce in conjunction with Gravity Forms? So my WordPress theme is GeneratePress, which I love. And we do not use WooCommerce. We don't really need shopping cart functionality if that makes sense. I consider WooCommerce great if you need a storefront, if you're shipping physical products, if people are going to be adding a lot of different products to their cart and checking out all at once. What we're doing is so simple in comparison to what I think WooCommerce is needed for. It's really just fill out this form and pay. And we're not expecting people to register for multiple things at a time. Or if they do register for multiple classes, I don't think it's much of a burden to check out for each class as needed. At least I hope not. Kyra wonders if we could share how much our ads budget is. We don't advertise. We have no ad budget. We market our classes strictly through email, through my email list, and through my website. And then obviously I do a lot of other things like extracurriculars. I speak at conferences. I teach with partners like Writer's Digest and Craft Talks. And so it's word of mouth. We don't advertise. And I know there was another question this reminds me of, why do I do free sessions? Because it's like advertising. So I always do one free class every month. It's either a class like this, it's like, I used to call them Sunday sermons. I also do business clinics, which is basically like a free business consultation with a writer for the public to sit in on and watch and see where the conversation goes. And I think this also feeds into my mission because I know despite charging, what I consider a low price, that's not a low price for everyone. Not everyone can afford to pay even $20 for a class. So I like to keep offering the free resources as a service, especially for things where I feel like people have the potential to lose money or be frustrated or get taken advantage of. And all other information that I think is just going to help the writing and publishing community do better. So this class specifically that we're running now was inspired by someone who's attending today. I think it's Heather, if I'm remembering right. Maybe Mark can help confirm. But someone who was like, can you please tell people how to run accessible classes? I'm like, well, okay, we can do that. So we do like to do things of service. It's a word that I use a lot. We do not use Hootsuite. Susan wonders if Squarespace has a plan like WordPress for payments. So Squarespace does have e-commerce built in, meaning they have a payment system built in, but I can't tell you anything about it since I'm not a Squarespace user. And just to clarify, someone in the chat mentioned Squarespace does work with Gravity Forms, that's awesome. I am curious if it has the same powerful functionality. I hope so. So those of you who are Squarespace users, perhaps you can set up a similar system. Jean wonders any way to handle duplicates that might occur with hide my email type services. Well, that's a great question. So if people use Apple to hide her email, what happens there? I guess it's possible you could register twice if you're asking Apple to hide your email. We have not encountered that yet, but now I'm going to be on the lookout for it to see if that does happen. But obviously your email address is used to register you for the class, and then the registration email goes back to whatever. I mean, I assume it still reaches its intended recipient wherever you are with your real email address. But there's only so much we can control. But I do think we eliminated like 99%, if not 100%, of duplicate registrations with that move. Heather says, after a class, participants receive a link to the recording. Why do they expire? What's the thinking? I think we explained now what the thinking is. One thing I didn't mention, though, is that we want instructors to be able to go off and teach that class again, however they wish, and to continue making money with that material, however they wish. So I don't take any rights to the material. I'm even happy to give them the recording. If they want to go sell the recording on their own, like on Teachable or off their website, by all means, it's theirs as far as I'm concerned. Now, I think I've already betrayed my thinking. It's really hard to sell a recording in my experience. Those who can do it, more power to you. But we don't. The other reason that we don't want to let the 30-day window go, like we don't want to keep access indefinite, is because we're not going to be alive indefinitely, which is maybe a morbid point to make. But we have to set a closing date because our lives go on, our business goes on. I would always be suspicious of anyone who gives you a lifetime guarantee to an online class because businesses change, because you have to be able to make decisions about what you're going to stop or what you're going to start. And so for us, 30 days, I think, is reasonable enough that people get what they need. It's a respectable amount of time to download the recordings if they can't watch them in 30 days, and for us to move on with our business and change our business however we see fit. Kelsey wonders if I can talk about the business strategy behind the free classes, low cost and higher cost. Do attendees of free classes translate to customers for paid? Yes. So as we discussed, it's a straightforward lead generation strategy, as well as service to the community. So we do get people taking the free and then going on to become paid students. There was some, give me a second to think about this for another moment. For what I consider a low cost class, in other words, $25, I'm fortunate to be in a position where I can do that, and it's still profitable enough for both me and Mark and the instructor to keep doing that. There are some folks who don't have the marketing reach. They don't have the email newsletter list or reach that I have. They don't have the reputation, or they can't attract the same quality of instructor. And so they can't make the numbers work at that price point. So they might only be able to get a few dozen in the door, and that would lead to very low amounts for payment for both sides. But because I do have this really strong reach, we can enroll hundreds of people in our classes, and you can do the math, multiplied by 25. And so people are getting compensated really well for their time. And that's why we can offer so much and be generous, because we are getting paid well. And I feel like everyone wins. The one thing we don't offer, at least for this model, when the price is $25, we're not offering personalized critiques. We're not, doing really hands-on workshop-y things where you're getting personal feedback on your work. We do try to answer every question that's asked, whether it's live or in writing, but there are limitations on what we can offer when the registration numbers are that high. And I noticed Susan has spoken up and said she started attending the paid classes because she was happy with my free things. So it does, I think, build trust and show that we're not here just to sell you something. Like, this is not a sales pitch. And other people, I do think, replicate our model and currently replicate our model very well. So we feel like there is room for everyone. Alita wonders if we've ever experienced glitches with security. So far, we have not. And I think partly that's because we run these in webinar mode. It would be really hard for someone to kind of disrupt a session. First of all, they have to pay for the paid classes anyway. For these free sessions, we still ask for people's email address to register and to show up live. And so far, fingers crossed, we haven't had any issues. The lighting question has come up in the Q&A. So Nicholas says, my guests often have horrible lighting, especially being backlit. I know Mark is on the front lines of that conversation. I don't know if he has anything more to say about it, but I will say I've got this, I mentioned in the chat, I've got a cheap ring light over here. I think it cost $100. It's on a stand, and you can like make it go higher, you can make it go lower, you can increase the intensity, you can change like if it's more white or more yellow, and you can probably find the setting you need to balance out what else is going on in the room. And then I've got a window over here. For those who remember me teaching in my Virginia office, I actually think that was even better than my current setup, because I had a window in front of me and I had a window to the left of me, and the lighting was just magical. I got compliments on the lighting all the time. Not saying that it's bad now, but it's a little more difficult just because of the way the light hits during different times of the day. Mark, do you have anything else to say about the lighting situation, dealing with any instructors with poor lighting? No. Okay. We tell people don't be backlit, but and I don't know if we've ever pushed people to switch rooms, but certainly it's when I work with instructors, normally I have seen them present before, normally, or I've seen them in action at a conference, I've seen them do Zoom. And so I do have a sense that it's probably going to work out okay. And then obviously Mark does his own checks as well. And then how do I keep the light from reflecting in my glasses? I think it's really just, trial and error of getting the setup correct so that that doesn't happen. It's not like I have a secret. It's just fiddling with the lights until it works okay. Amanda wonders how I decide which classes to offer. So this is very much gut driven. I don't have like a really great bulleted list to give you on how this decision process works. Part of it is I've been in the industry since the late 90s, and I worked with Writer's Digest for 12 years. I saw what sold both on the book side and the magazine side and on the online education side. I obviously have an active newsletter, I have an active blog, and I see what gets the most reaction. I see the questions that come in, like through my contact form. I go to conferences, I hear the concerns being spoken about there. And so you develop this gut feeling for what's going to perform. So for example, I couldn't teach you anything about hybrid memoir. And in fact, so those of you who followed me for a long time know that I actively counsel people to try to sidestep the hybrid memoir category entirely. But it's become more and more popular over the years for good reasons, for market reasons. And so I finally decided I need to find someone who can speak to this, because I'm getting all these questions, and there's a hunger for someone to say something reasonably authoritative. And so the person I chose for that was Courtney Mom, because she's published hybrid memoir, she's written about hybrid memoir, she obviously reads hybrid memoir. And when I reached out to her with my reasons for wanting to do this, she agreed. But there are also just really good bread and butter topics that people will always be interested in. So like anything related to the craft of fiction, anything related to the craft of memoir, that's really what you'll see most of the classes based on. And then the business classes about querying and pitching and proposals and platform, those are also really good bread and butter sessions. Kyra says, can you talk about class pricing and responses to prices? We offer 60-minute classes, $25. I'm finding that it's hard to get folks to pay that price, which is surprising because it feels accessible. Do you get more registration at your free and 100 plus price points, or are the 25 classes popular? The $25 classes are by far the most popular, like they're hands down, no question, no contest. They've always been. And I think, when I hear about people struggling to get people in at the lower price points, I mean, I have maybe two key reasons that might be happening. One, the instructor isn't known or trusted enough. They might not have much of a presence or a platform. They might not have their own marketing. They can't do their own outreach to people who know them or trust them already. So the instructor matters to turnout. I mean, obviously I have my own reach, but if people aren't inspired by who the instructor is and what their credentials are, the turnout will be low. And I certainly have had students reach out to me when they feel uncertain about the instructor. Like they trust me, but they read the instructor bio and they're like, I don't know. And they will be honest enough to contact me and say, do you really think this person knows what they're doing? And I'm like, well, I do, yes. So instructor will drives at least half of it. Obviously, the choice of topic is a really big deal as well. I did a separate Sunday sermon about teaching. No, this was actually a business clinic. I worked with a specific writer who was struggling to get enrollment in her classes. And we talked a lot about how she was titling the classes, how she was describing the classes, what her registration pages looked like. And so we went through a whole host of issues that might have been affecting her registration numbers. So I find that aside from the choosing the right instructor, choosing the right topic, you also have to have a marketing page and a description and a title that positions it so you attract the right people. Or obviously a lot of different ingredients that go into making the right offer to get people in the door. But trust is by far, I think, the biggest issue there. Vimeo versus YouTube. Now, I know why I chose Vimeo years ago, and we haven't honestly looked at YouTube as a solution since we chose Vimeo. Mark, do you have it? I know I kind of zoned out during your Vimeo discussion. Do you want to talk about Vimeo and how it powers what you're doing again?
Sure, I can, but I am actually dying to hear your answer to the question, because I don't know why we use Vimeo instead of YouTube to host those videos. I mean, I guess I tend to think of Vimeo as a little bit more of a walled garden. It's just a bit more private. I mean, I know that you can host private videos on YouTube. I'm just not sure why our model evolved to use one other than the other. But yes, if you just want me to briefly mention again how I use Vimeo, yeah, it's just to host the video that gets streamed on our website. The version that you download actually doesn't come from Vimeo, it comes from Google Drive. They're two separate files. Um, okay, now I'm going to go ahead and let you tell me why we use Vimeo.
Okay, so I have to add the caveat here that I haven't looked at YouTube in years for this purpose. So at the time I made this decision, Vimeo was really the only option if I wanted to host the video on my own website and not have it visible or shareable elsewhere. So Vimeo really allows you to tightly control that file and ensure that it isn't available except where you explicitly allow it to be available. So there's a little like you literally put in Vimeo, you say this video can only appear and be streamed at courses.janefriedman.com or whatever website you want. So now I could be wrong, but my impression of YouTube, it is a kind of basic, it's a social media sharing sort of platform. I don't think it's really meant, as I see it, to keep things private and locked down and to only stream things where you want them to be streamed. So my impression is you can just share a link to a private video to anyone you want and they can watch it. Now, maybe things have changed since I last evaluated YouTube as a tool. But I personally would not want to put anything on YouTube that I wasn't happy with the whole world seeing, regardless of how it was classified, public, private, unlisted, etc. So I think Vimeo is the more, in my mind, it's the more professional way to go, and it's the more private way to go. Heather wonders if we could offer the nightmare scenario story of a day when so much went on, keep us all humble, and know it will happen despite best efforts. I mean, I'll never forget the day we hosted Amy Collins for a class and her internet went out. And she had to finish the webinar on her mobile device. That was not my favorite day. Um, but I feel like that was probably the most stressful. I've probably blocked some of the other. Oh, okay. Mark has something.
It's happened on more than one occasion where our computers have gone kerflooey. In fact, that just happened on a recent webinar where Jane's Zoom just stopped cooperating and she disappeared. And it happened to be during the Q&A portion when the speaker, our guest presenter, was answering a question. It happened to be a very long answer. And unbeknownst to her, Jane had actually disappeared from the webinar. And next time Jane appeared, she was standing here at my computer because hers wasn't working anymore.
Yeah, that was unpleasant. I hate it when Zoom just goes out like that. Um, so Heather wonders what percentage of online courses make up the entire business. So in terms of dollars, it's somewhere around 60 to 70% as of last year. The rest of it would be things like sponsorships for my newsletter, my paid newsletter, live speaking fees, and then also classes that I teach with partners. So not for myself, but like with Writer's Digest or with Craft Talks. And then in terms of prep time, I mean, it really varies depending on the frequency. So in 2023, we offered a class about 3 times a month. And that was a much greater proportion of our time that year, but we pulled back or tried to pull back to twice a month this year. Although we've, some months we do more and others less, depending on my travel schedule. So it's definitely not what I spend the most time on. It is very efficient for me, mainly because I have Mark to do all of the things that he described. So for my personal time commitment, there's a really concentrated bit of time that I spend for programming and instructor guidance. I usually start, like I said, I start planning for the following year like it's going to be around August. So there'll be a concentrated amount of time I spend on it. And then once it's set, things just happen in a very consistent, scheduled manner where we get in the marketing copy and we put it up. But there's not a whole work. There's not much work for me personally involved except the day of the class. And I just normally, that's those days, I don't do any other important deadline work. It's just devoted to the class. Kelsey is wondering how I select instructors. What am I looking for? Do instructors pitch me? So most instructors I work with, I've known for a long time. So my Writer's Digest background means I've been in touch with all sorts of writing instructors, sometimes for more than 20 years. Many of them have written for the magazine. They've written for the book line, or they've written their own books. They speak at conferences. So their reputation is really well known to me. They might have a popular Substack. So usually people need to be known quantities before I work with them as an instructor, because I don't want to be someone's first rodeo. That said, I do work with people who I might not know as well, but I need to see that they've actually done a paid class in almost all scenarios. It's not a fun thing, in my opinion, to try and help someone understand what it means to run an effective online class when they've never done it before. And I find that the skill sets between presenting like at a conference in person, it's not the same skill set as presenting an online class in a webinar format, especially if it can feel more high pressure. I find that some people have a hard time speaking to the camera with no one else in the room to feed off. You don't feed off people's energy. They can get kind of flustered sometimes if the tech doesn't go exactly right, or they can't, there's so many things that can put people off their game. They could ordinarily be a fabulous speaker, but just not be very compelling in an online format. So that's why I almost 99% of the time I look for people who've already had experience doing webinar style classes that people have paid for, because I don't consider myself a great trainer and I don't like being on top of people, trying to coach them through how to do all of this. And part of it's a time issue. So efficient classes means I'm not holding people by the hand through the process. Some of it is also just gut instinct, even if I haven't seen someone up close and personal in the way that I would always like. I can tell by the way that they write articles, or by the way they engage online or through conversations, I can tell that they're probably going to be well suited to this. some of it goes back, just one last piece of advice on this for those who might be looking for instructors. Part of this goes back to my time at Writer's Digest when we were recruiting people to write for the magazine or the book line. You always look for someone who was student or writer focused rather than focused on themselves. And there are some good teachers who can focus on themselves and talk about the students, but that it's rare. And so what you see when the writing instructor is too focused on themselves, their teaching ends up being a series of, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then I wrote, and then I published, rather than thinking about how can I distill my process, my wisdom into second person clear takeaways. Like, here's what you should consider doing. Here's what this looks like on the page. Here's a before, here's an after, here's how to deconstruct what's happening in this book. So all of my past experience has basically led me to this moment where I can pretty well pick out who's going to be well suited to teaching in the way that I like to teach, and the way that I like to present for writers. Okay, I'm going to pause there since we're definitely over our hour allotment. Mark, is there anything I've missed that you think I should address? Because I haven't been paying much attention to the chat. Nope. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming today. I hope this has provided a level of insight, education, entertainment about what goes on here behind the scenes with our online classes. I hope that we continue offering them for many years to come. It's certainly enjoyable for us, and even more enjoyable when we know how much a class has helped you. So please continue to give us feedback, whether that's through the survey or directly through email. Send us your class ideas, send us your instructor ideas. We're always open to hearing from you. And I look forward to seeing you in class again soon. Goodbye, everyone.